Have you ever walked into a room where you knew, logically, that you owned the place, but every pair of eyes staring back at you made you feel like you were there to empty the trash? It's a heavy feeling. Man, it's like carrying a sack of stones that nobody else can see, but the weight is real enough to break your back. I've spent 45 years on this earth, 20 of those climbing a ladder that felt like it was greased with oil, just to get to a point where I didn't have to check the price tag on my dreams. But that day, standing at the threshold of that silver bird at JFK, all that success felt as thin as a sheet of paper. I was holding a $10,000 ticket in my hand, a golden ticket, a symbol of every late night, every missed dinner with my kids, and every time I had to be twice as good to get half as much. Yet, the air in that jet bridge felt cold enough to freeze my soul. Before I get deep into the grit of what happened on that flight to London, I want to take a second to check in with you all. Where are you joining me from today? Are you sitting in a quiet office in New York, a busy kitchen in Atlanta, or maybe you're halfway across the world? Drop a comment and let me know your city. We're a community here, and your stories matter just as much as mine. And listen, if you've ever felt like an outsider in a place you worked hard to belong, hit that subscribe button. We talk about the real stuff here, the stuff they don't teach you in business school. We talk about the heart. Now, let me set the stage for you. That morning started out like any other big win morning. I had just closed a merger that most people in my industry said was impossible. I was the CEO of a tech firm that I started in a garage with nothing but a used laptop and a lot of prayer. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., not because I had to, but because my spirit was humming. I put on my armor. That's what I call my suits. It was a charcoal gray, bespoke 3-piece, tailored so sharp it could cut glass. I polished my shoes until I could see my own reflection in the leather, a reflection of a man who had made it. I remember looking in the mirror and thinking, Elias, you did it. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. The drive to JFK was smooth. The city was just waking up, that hazy blue light hitting the skyscrapers I had helped modernize. I felt like I was on top of the world. I got to the airport, and usually, the noise and the chaos of the terminal bother me. But not that day. I walked through the terminal with a stride that said, I knew exactly where I was going. I went straight to the business class lounge. Now, if you've never been in one of those lounges, they're designed to be an oasis, soft jazz, the smell of expensive coffee and toasted croissants, and a silence so thick you could wrap yourself in it. But as soon as I stepped inside, the silence changed. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a question. I felt the click-clack of my heels on the marble floor echoing a bit too loud. I saw a woman in the corner, dressed in pearls and a silk scarf, instinctively pull her designer purse a little closer to her hip when I walked past. She didn't even realize she did it. It was muscle memory. It was the black tax being collected in real time. I sat down, tried to focus on my tablet, checking the final numbers for the London meeting, but I could feel the glances. They weren't looking at my suit. They weren't looking at the watch my wife gave me for our 15th anniversary. They were looking at the shade of my skin and trying to figure out the error in the matrix. I took a sip of my espresso, and it tasted like ash. I told myself, don't let them get to you. Elias, you earned this seat. You belong here. But man, it's exhausting. It's a soul-crushing kind of pain when you realize that no matter how many zeros are in your bank account, some people will only ever see a stereotype. When the announcement came for Group 1 boarding, I stood up. I was ready to get on that plane, close my eyes, and just be a passenger, I wanted to disappear into the luxury I had paid for. I walked toward the gate, and the line was short, just a few of us. There was an older gentleman in front of me, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and cargo shorts. He looked like he was going on a fishing trip, not a transatlantic business flight. The gate agent smiled at him, called him sir, and ushered him through with a nod. Then, it was my turn. I stepped up to the counter, my back straight, my ticket held out. The agent didn't look at the ticket first. She looked at my face. Then her eyes traveled down my suit. And finally, she looked at the Group 1 marking on the screen. Her smile didn't just fade, it vanished. It was like someone had flipped a switch and the lights went out. She didn't call me sir. She didn't even say, "Good morning." She just held out her hand for my passport with a jerk of her chin. I handed it over, watching her thumb through the pages of my well-traveled passport, like she was looking for a reason to find a forgery. "Business class?" she asked, her voice flat, laced with a skepticism that stung worse than a slap. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. "Seat 1A. She handed the documents back without making eye contact, her fingers barely brushing mine, as if she were afraid something might rub off on her. I took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of my leather briefcase, and walked down the jet bridge. The jet bridge is that liminal space, you know, that long, narrow tunnel between the world, you know, and the sky. Usually, it's a place of anticipation. But that morning, it felt like a gauntlet. The air was stale, smelling of jet fuel and the metallic tang of New York winter. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. I could hear the faint sound of the engines whining, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in my chest. I reached the end of the tunnel. I reached the door of the aircraft, where the real journey was supposed to begin. I saw her standing there, the lead flight attendant. Her name tag said Sarah, and she was the picture of professional perfection. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, blonde bun, not a single strand out of place. She was wearing a bright red scarf that popped against her navy blue uniform. She was laughing at something the cargo shorts guy had said, her hand resting lightly on the bulkhead of the plane. I stepped across the threshold, moving from the carpet of the jet bridge to the metallic floor of the plane. I felt the change in pressure, the slight shift in the atmosphere. I stopped right in front of her, holding my ticket out, ready to be shown to my sanctuary. Sarah turned her head toward me. The laughter on her face didn't just stop, it froze, like a frame in a movie that had been paused. Her eyes didn't go to my ticket. They didn't go to my face. Her gaze dropped immediately to my hands, then to my waist, and then back up to my chest, scanning me with a cold, clinical intensity that made the heat rise in the back of my neck. She didn't move an inch to let me pass. She didn't reach out to take the boarding pass I was offering. Instead, she planted her feet, crossed her arms over her chest, and tilted her head back just enough to look down her nose at me. The silence between us wasn't just quiet, it was loud. It was screaming with all the things she wasn't saying. I could see the muscles in her jaw tighten. I could see the way her nostrils flared slightly, as if she were smelling something unpleasant. I stood there, my arm still extended, the paper ticket trembling just a fraction of an inch in the recycled air of the cabin. I felt a bead of sweat roll down the small of my back. Despite the chill in the air, I looked her straight in the eyes, refusing to be the one to look away first. I wanted her to see the man, not the shadow she had conjured in her mind. I wanted her to see the CEO, the father, the human being who had every right to be in that space. But Sarah didn't see any of that. Her eyes were like two chips of blue ice, devoid of any warmth or recognition. She took a half step forward, closing the small gap between us until I could smell the floral scent of her perfume mixed with the sterile scent of the cabin. She didn't ask for my ticket. She didn't welcome me aboard. She just stared at me, her lips thinning into a hard, white line, as if she were bracing herself for a confrontation she had already decided was inevitable. I felt my heart thumping against my ribs, a slow, rhythmic drumbeat of frustration and weariness. I was tired of fighting before I even sat down. I was tired of proving I belonged in a seat I had already bought and paid for. Finally, she spoke, but it wasn't a greeting. Her voice was a sharp, biting whisper that cut through the low hum of the plane's electrical systems. She didn't even look at the golden ticket in my hand as she pointed a manicured finger back toward the dark, narrow mouth of the jet bridge I had just emerged from. Her hand didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. She just stood her ground, an immovable barrier between me and the seat that bore my name. Her eyes locked onto mine with a look of pure, unadulterated defiance. The air in the galley felt like it was running out, sucked away by the sheer coldness of the woman standing in my path. I didn't move. I didn't back down. I just watched that manicured finger pointed toward the back of the plane like she was shooing a stray dog away from a dinner table. It's a funny thing, man, how a single gesture can try to strip away 20 years of grit and sacrifice. She wasn't just pointing to a seat. She was pointing to a place in society she thought I belonged in. "I think there's a misunderstanding," she said, though her tone told me she didn't believe there was any mistake at all. "The main cabin is through that curtain and all the way to the rear. This section is reserved for our executive tier passengers." I looked down at my boarding pass again, the gold trim catching the harsh, fluorescent lights of the cabin. "I'm aware of where the main cabin is," I said, my voice coming out deeper and steadier than I felt inside. "But my seat is 1A. That's right here." She didn't even reach for the paper. She just shook her head, a small, tight movement that spoke volumes. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back onto the jet bridge for a moment while I verify your documents. We've had issues with seating errors this morning." Seating errors. We both knew that was a lie. The error she saw was the man standing in front of her. As I stood there, forced to wait while she whispered into her radio, my mind drifted back to how I got here. You see, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I grew up in a house where the heater worked only half the time, and my mother's hands were always stained with the industrial soap from the hotel laundry, where she worked double shifts. I remember her coming home, her back hunched like a question mark, smelling of bleach and exhaustion. She used to tell me, "Elias, they can take your money, they can take your time, but don't you ever let them take your dignity." I worked 3 jobs to get through college. I spent my weekends coding in a basement while my friends were out partying. I built my company from a folding table and a dream because I wanted to make sure my kids never had to feel the sting of a no before they even opened their mouths. I thought I had reached the mountaintop. I thought that by the time I was sitting in a $10,000 seat, the world would finally see the man and not the skin. But standing there in that narrow aisle, with the smell of expensive leather and heated nuts wafting from the cabin, I wasn't allowed to enter. I felt like that little boy again, the one who was told he couldn't play in the park on the other side of town. The pain was sharp, a jagged edge cutting through the pride I had spent decades building. It's a gut punch that leaves you breathless, not because you're weak, but because you're just so tired of the fight. Finally, Sarah lowered her radio. She didn't apologize. She just stepped aside, her body language stiff and resentful. "Fine. You may proceed, but keep your bag under the ottoman. We need to keep the aisles clear." I walked past her, the fabric of my suit brushing against her uniform. I sat down in 1A, It was a beautiful seat, a private pod with a lie-flat bed and a massive screen. But the luxury felt hollow. I watched the other passengers board. A young tech bro in a hoodie and flip-flops sat across from me. Sarah greeted him with a beaming smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller. Can I get you a pre-flight mimosa? Or perhaps some warmed almonds?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "Yeah, whatever," he grunted. She turned to me, the smile vanishing instantly, as if she'd walked into a wall of fog. "We'll be departing shortly," she said. And then she walked away without offering me a thing. Not a drink, not a menu, nothing. I sat there, staring at the blank screen in front of me. I could feel the eyes of the other passengers. You know that feeling. When you're in a crowded room, but you're the only person. Anyone is watching. I saw a man 2 rows back leaning over to whisper something to his wife, his eyes darting toward me and then away. I saw the way people clutched their tablets a little tighter when they walked past my seat to get to the lavatory. About 20 minutes into the flight, once we had reached our cruising altitude, Sarah came back through the cabin with the beverage cart. She served everyone around me. She laughed at Mr. Miller's jokes. She helped an elderly woman with her blanket. When she got to me, she didn't stop. She just kept rolling that cart toward the back of the plane. "Excuse me," I said, raising my hand slightly. "I'd like to order from the dining menu when you have a moment." She stopped and turned around, her face a mask of annoyance. "I'll get to you when I've finished serving the priority guests." "Sir, I am a priority guest," I said, my voice tight. "I'm a Diamond Circle member. I've flown 100,000 miles with this airline this year alone." She stepped closer, leaning down so only I could hear her. "Listen, I don't know how you got this seat. And frankly, I don't care. But I've had a passenger express concern about your presence in this cabin. They said you were acting erratic and aggressive at the gate. For the safety of the flight, I'm going to need to see your government-issued ID again. Right now." My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. Erratic, aggressive. I had been nothing but silent and composed. This was the trap. This was the moment where they try to goad you into a reaction just so they can justify the way they've been treating you. If I got angry, I was the aggressive black man. If I stayed quiet, I was suspicious. I looked around the cabin. Everyone was watching now. The silence was deafening, broken only by the low, constant roar of the jet engines. I felt a wave of heat wash over me, a mixture of humiliation and a burning. Righteous anger. I reached into my breast pocket, my fingers trembling with the effort of keeping my cool. I pulled out my wallet and handed her my ID. She snatched it from my hand, scanning it with a look of pure disgust. "This doesn't look like you," she muttered, "even though the photo was taken only 6 months ago. I'm going to have to take this to the purser for verification. Stay in your seat. Do not get up for any reason." She walked away with my identity in her hand, leaving me sitting there like a criminal in a 5-star hotel. I looked out the window at the clouds below, vast, white, and indifferent. We were 30,000 feet in the air, but I had never felt more grounded by the weight of the world. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was the man in the cargo shorts from the gate, the one who had been ushered through with a smile. He looked at me, then at the space where Sarah had disappeared. "Hey, man," he whispered. That was uncalled for. I saw the whole thing. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to swallow. I realized then that I couldn't just sit here and take it. Not this time. Not after everything I had built. I wasn't just Elias the CEO anymore. I was a man who owed it to his mother, to his kids, and to every person who looked like me to stand up for the truth. I reached into the seat pocket and pulled out my phone. I knew the airline had high-speed Wi-Fi, and as a top-tier member, I had a direct line to the executive offices for emergency travel issues. My hands were steady now. The anger hadn't left, but it had turned into something else, something sharp and purposeful. I pulled up my contact list and scrolled down to a name I hadn't called in a long time. It was the personal satellite line for the one person who could change the temperature in this cabin with a single sentence. I looked back toward the galley, where I could see Sarah and another flight attendant huddled together, pointing at my ID and whispering. I didn't wait for them to come back. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear, watching the signal bars climb as the call connected to a tower miles below us. The ringing tone was rhythmic, a countdown to a reality Sarah wasn't prepared for. I leaned back into the expensive leather of seat 1A, my eyes locked on the curtain of the galley, waiting for the first sign of movement. I could feel the vibration of the engines through the floorboards, a powerful, steady pulse that seemed to sync with my own breathing as I waited for the voice on the other end of the line to pick up. "Elias, is that you?" "Old friend." The voice on the other end of the line was gravelly, warm, and instantly recognizable. It was Marcus Thorne. Most people knew him as the billionaire chairman of this entire airline, the man whose face appeared in the back of the in-flight magazines, talking about global connectivity and excellence in service. To me, he was just Marcus, the guy I'd spent 6 months in a windowless boardroom with 5 years ago, hammering out a logistics contract that saved his company from a hostile takeover. We had shared cold pizza and warm bourbon at 3 a.m. more times than I could count. We were two men who respected the hustle because we both knew what it was like to start with nothing. "It's me, Marcus," I said, my voice low. I didn't look at the other passengers. I didn't look at the tech bro across the aisle. I kept my eyes fixed on the blue-gray curtain of the galley, which was now fluttering as Sarah and a tall, stern-looking man in a purser's uniform stepped through. "I'm on the 10, 15 out of JFK. I think we have a situation that needs your eyes." "Brother." I saw the purser, a man with a silver-streaked buzz cut and a jawline like a hatchet, approaching with my ID held between 2 fingers like it was a piece of contaminated evidence. Sarah was right behind him, her arms crossed, a look of smug expectation on her face. She looked like she was about to watch a movie she already knew the ending to. "What's going on?" "Elias, you sound different," Marcus said, his voice sharpening. He knew me. He knew I didn't call his private satellite line for small talk. "I'm sitting in 1A, I told him, as the purser stopped right at the edge of my pod. "But apparently, there's a concerned passenger and a crew that thinks my presence here is an error. I've had my ID confiscated, and I've been told not to leave my seat for safety reasons. I just wanted to verify my status with you before things get complicated." The purser cleared his throat, a sharp, authoritative sound. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to end that call immediately. Cell phone use is restricted during this phase of flight, and we have serious matters to discuss regarding your conduct." I didn't lower the phone. I just looked up at him, and for the first time in 20 minutes, I let the CEO out. I let that cold, calculating part of my brain take the wheel, the part that had survived predatory lenders and cutthroat competitors. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get aggressive. I just let my eyes go dead. "Marcus," I said into the phone, "the purser is here now. He's telling me to hang up on you. Do you want to talk to him? Or should I just let him finish whatever it is he thinks he's doing?" There was a silence on the other end that felt like the air before a lightning strike. "Put him on." "Elias," Marcus said. and his voice was so cold I could almost see the frost on the receiver. "Put him on right now." I didn't hand the phone over immediately. I looked at the purser, then at Sarah. Sarah was leaning against the bulkhead, a tiny, crooked smile playing on her lips. She thought she'd won. She thought the problem was about to be removed. "The chairman of your board would like a word with you," I said, holding the phone out toward the purser. The man actually laughed. It was a short, dry bark. "Sir, impersonating a connection to corporate leadership is a federal offense when it interferes with flight crew duties. I suggest you put the device away and prepare to be escorted to the rear of the aircraft until we can coordinate with ground security." "Take the phone," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "His name is Marcus Thorne. He's waiting." The purser's eyes flickered, just for a second. He saw something in my expression, maybe the lack of fear, or the sheer, exhausted boredom of a man who has seen this play 1,000 times, that made him hesitate. He looked at the phone. He looked at the caller, ID, which simply read, "Thorne Satellite." He took the phone. He put it to his ear with a look of pure condescension. "This is Purser Jenkins. To whom am I speaking?" I watched his face. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. First, the color drained from his cheeks. Then, his shoulders, which had been square and rigid, began to slump. His jaw, that hatchet-like jaw, actually began to tremble. Yes, sir," he stammered. I wasn't aware. No, sir. There was a report from a passenger and... Yes, of course. I see. No, sir. I understand. I'll address it immediately. Yes, sir. Right away." He handed the phone back to me with hands that were visibly shaking. He didn't look at Sarah. He didn't look at the passengers. He looked at his own shoes. "Mister, Thorne would like to speak to you again." "Sir," Jenkins whispered, his voice cracking. "And he asked me to stay right here while you finish the conversation." I took the phone back. "I'm here, Marcus. Ilias. Listen to me," Marcus said, and I could hear him pacing on the other end. "The captain is coming out. His name is David. He's a good man, a veteran. He's gonna fix this. And as for the woman, the one who started this, don't you worry about a thing. You enjoy your flight. You get that contract in London. I'll call you when you land." "Thanks, Marcus," I said. I ended the call and tucked the phone back into my vest pocket. The cabin was silent. Even the tech bro had stopped typing. The only sound was the muffled roar of the wind outside the pressurized hull. Suddenly, the cockpit door clicked open. A man in a crisp captain's uniform, with 4 gold bars on his shoulders and a chest full of experience, stepped into the galley. He didn't look at Jenkins. He didn't look at Sarah. He walked straight to seat 1A. He didn't just stand there. He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with me. It was a gesture of profound respect, one that sent a shock wave through the cabin. "Mr. Vance," the captain said, his voice deep and sincere. "I am Captain David Miller. I cannot begin to express my deepest apologies for the way you have been treated on my aircraft. There has been a grievous failure of professional conduct here today, and I want you to know that it does not reflect the values of this airline or this crew." He turned his head slightly, looking over his shoulder at Sarah, who was now backed against the galley wall, her face as white as the napkins she'd refused to give me. "Sarah," the captain said, and his voice was like a whip, "you will go to the crew rest area immediately. You are relieved of all duties for the remainder of this flight. You will not interact with any passengers, and specifically, you will stay away from this cabin. Purser Jenkins. You will bring Mr. Vance his ID, a fresh menu, and whatever he desires from the cellar. And you will do it now." Jenkins moved faster than I'd ever seen a man move. He handed me my passport like it was a holy relic. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vance. Truly, I should have checked the manifest properly. You should have seen me," I said, cutting him off. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact. As they scurried away, the captain stayed for a moment. He put a hand on the armrest of my pod. "Mr. Vance, we're about 6 hours out from London. If there is anything at all, you need, you ask for me directly. We're going to make this right. I appreciate that." "Captain," I said. He nodded and headed back to the cockpit. The curtain to the galley closed. I sat there, alone in the silence of my luxury pod. My heart was still racing, but the anger had started to cool into a heavy, dull ache. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, but they felt old. I thought about my mother again. I thought about the way she used to scrub the floors of the wealthy, never looking up, never complaining, just so I could have the chance to sit in a seat like this. I had won. The bad guy was gone. The CEO had been vindicated. But as I leaned my head back against the headrest, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a man who had just survived a storm, only to realize the ship was still leaking. I felt the weight of every time I'd had to be more, just to be equal. I reached out and touched the smooth, cold surface of the champagne flute that Jenkins had just set down on my console with a trembling hand. The bubbles were rising, fast and bright, hitting the surface and disappearing into nothing. I watched them for a long time, the golden liquid reflecting the sun that was pouring through the window at 30,000 feet. I wasn't the aggressive man they wanted me to be. I wasn't the victim they tried to make me. I was just Elias Vance. And for the first time since I'd stepped onto the jet bridge, I closed my eyes and let out a breath I'd been holding since I was 6 years old, feeling the vibration of the plane beneath me as we surged forward into the vast, empty blue. The hum of the engines changed pitch, dropping into a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the soles of my shoes as we began our long descent toward London Heathrow. I watched the flight map on the screen in front of me, a little digital plane inching across a vast blue void, finally touching the edge of a green coastline. For the last few hours, the cabin had been a tomb of expensive silence. The clinking of silverware had stopped. Even the tech bro across the aisle had put his headphones away, occasionally stealing glances at me like I was a statue that might suddenly come to life and breathe fire. The purser, Jenkins, had tried to overserve me for the rest of the flight. He brought me warm towels every 30 minutes. He offered me vintage wines I didn't want, and appetizers that looked like tiny pieces of art. Every time he approached, he bowed slightly, his eyes never quite meeting mine. He was terrified. He wasn't being kind because he realized I was a human being. He was being kind because he finally realized who my friends were. And honestly, that's the part that sticks in my throat. It shouldn't take a phone call to a billionaire to get a man a glass of water and a shred of respect. I looked out the window as the gray, misty shroud of English clouds began to swallow the wings. I thought about my 2 sons back in the States. I thought about the world I was building for them. When they grow up, will they have to carry a digital armor of status just to walk through a door? Will they have to show a black and gold card just to prove they aren't a threat? I felt a sudden, sharp pang of exhaustion. Not the kind you get from lack of sleep, but the kind that settles into your marrow when you realize the finish line keeps moving. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed. A crisp, electronic sound that felt like a gavel hitting a block. The cabin crew began their final checks. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. She had been vanished into the crew rest area. A ghost of a prejudice that had been tucked away for the sake of the airline's PR. But I knew she was still there. I knew she was sitting in the dark, probably fuming, probably blaming me for ruining her career, never once realizing she had set the fire herself. As we broke through the cloud cover, the sprawling patchwork of London appeared below us, wet, ancient, and indifferent. The wheels hit the tarmac with a violent thud and a roar of reverse thrust that pushed me back into my seat. We had arrived, but as we taxied toward the gate, the tension in the cabin didn't dissipate. It shifted. The man in the cargo shorts, my neighbor from the gate who had witnessed the whole ugly scene, leaned over the aisle as we slowed to a crawl. He didn't look like a Group 1 guy, but he had a kindness in his eyes that was worth more than a first-class ticket. "I'm glad you stood up," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the whine of the brakes. Most people would have just taken the insult. They would have moved to the back just to avoid the scene. But you stayed. You forced them to see you. I looked at him, and for the first time in 8 hours, I felt a genuine smile tug at the corners of my mouth. I didn't stay for the seat. I told him. I stayed because I'm tired of moving. If we keep moving every time someone points a finger, eventually we'll run out of places to stand. He nodded. A slow, somber movement. Safe travels. Elias, I hope the rest of your trip is better than the start. The plane came to a final halt at the jet bridge. Usually, there's a mad scramble to get out of these seats, a frantic rustle of bags and jackets. But today, everyone waited. They waited for me. It was a strange, silent acknowledgement of the hierarchy that had been flipped on its head. Jenkins stood by the exit, his face a mask of professional regret. "Mr. Vance," he said, stepping forward as I stood up and adjusted my suit jacket. There is someone waiting for you at the end of the tunnel, an executive representative from the airline." I didn't say anything. I just picked up my briefcase, the same one that Sarah had looked at with such suspicion, and walked toward the door. I stepped out of the pressurized cabin and into the cool, damp air of the Heathrow terminal. Standing at the end of the jet bridge was a woman in a sharp navy suit, holding a tablet with my name on it. Next to her were 2 men in dark overcoats. They weren't airport security. They were corporate. Behind them, I saw Sarah. She was being escorted off the plane by a different crew member, her head down, her red scarf tucked into her pocket. She looked small. She looked like a person who had finally realized that the world was much bigger than the narrow hallway she had been guarding. The woman in the navy suit stepped forward. "Mr. Vance, I'm Catherine, Director of Ground Operations. On behalf of Marcus Thorne and the entire board, we offer our sincerest apologies. We have already initiated a full internal investigation into the events of Flight 10-15. Sarah has been suspended, pending a termination hearing, and Purser Jenkins will be undergoing mandatory sensitivity retraining." She paused, waiting for me to say something. To demand a refund, to threaten a lawsuit, to show the aggression they were so afraid of. I looked past her, through the large glass windows of the terminal, watching the ground crew unload the luggage from the belly of the beast. I thought about the 20-year-old Elias, who would have been shaking with rage. I thought about the 30-year-old Elias, who would have been looking for a way to sue them for every penny. But the 45-year-old Elias, he just wanted to go to his meeting. I don't want her life ruined. "Catherine," I said, my voice low and resonant. "I just want her to learn. I want her to understand that the man in the suit is no different from the man in the hoodie. We are both carrying the same weight. We are both trying to get home. Catherine looked surprised. Of course. Sir, we appreciate your grace. We have a car waiting to take you directly to your hotel. Your luggage has already been prioritized. I walked through the terminal, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I didn't look back. I had a merger to close. I had a world to change. But as I walked, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I had faced the monster, and I hadn't let it turn me into one of them. Listen, if you're still here, if you've watched this whole journey from that gate at JFK to the rain-slicked streets of London, I want you to hear me clearly. Success is a powerful tool, but your dignity is your weapon. They will try to tell you where you belong. They will try to point you toward the rear of your own life. They will try to make you feel like an intruder in the spaces you've built with your own 2 hands. Don't you dare move. You hold your ground. You keep your head up. You speak your truth even if your voice shakes. Because you aren't just standing for yourself. You're standing for every person who is coming up behind you. You're clearing the path. You're the one who is making sure that the next time a boy who looks like me walks onto a plane, the only question he gets asked is, how can we make your flight more comfortable? Sir, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own worth, please share it. Let's get this message out to anyone who's feeling unseen today. Comment below with the word worthy, so I know you're with me. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Unseen Sky Truths. We've got more stories to tell, more walls to break down, and more truths to uncover. I'm Elias Vance, and I'm finally sitting in the seat I earned. I'll see you in the next video. Be blessed, keep thriving, and never let them take your sky. The sliding doors of the terminal opened, and the cool London air hit my face, smelling of rain and possibility. I stepped into the waiting car, closed the door, and for the first time that day, I let out a long, slow breath of peace. That day, I was sitting in seat 1A, right there in the front of the cabin, where the air smells like expensive lime cologne and entitlement. I was in the heart of the first-class section. But to that flight attendant, I wasn't a passenger who had paid 5 figures for a ticket. To her, I was an intruder. I was a glitch in the system, a shadow that had accidentally wandered into a room full of light. She didn't know that the small, battered wooden box I was clutching against my chest, the one she looked at like it was a piece of radioactive trash, was actually my entire world. She didn't know it held the only thing I had left of the woman who taught me how to stand tall when the world wanted me on my knees. Before I get too deep into this, I want to say thank you for being here with me. If you're new to the channel, I'm glad you found your way to this corner of the internet. We talk about the things people usually whisper about. We talk about the unseen sky truths that stay hidden in the clouds. Do me a favor right now. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Are you in a quiet bedroom in Atlanta? A noisy apartment in Chicago? Or maybe you're halfway across the world? I want to know whose heart I'm talking to today. And if you believe that a man's worth isn't measured by the shade of his skin or the brand of his suit, hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and I don't want you to miss a single step of this journey. Now, let's go back to that morning at JFK. The airport was a hive of activity, a sea of suits and rolling luggage. You know, that specific hum an airport has. It's a mix of jet fuel, burnt coffee, and the desperate energy of thousands of people trying to be somewhere else. I was standing in the middle of it all, feeling like a ghost. I'm 50 years old. I've built companies from the dirt up. I've sat in boardrooms where the mahogany tables cost more than my first house. But that morning, I wasn't the CEO. I was just Marcus. A man with a heavy heart and a heavier box. I was wearing an old, gray wool sweater. It was pilled at the elbows and a little too loose around the waist. My daughter told me to wear my Burberry trench coat. My assistant suggested the tailored navy blazer I usually wear for mergers, but I couldn't do it. This sweater, it was the last thing my mother knitted for me before her hands got too tired to hold the needles. It smelled like her. It smelled like home, a mix of peppermint tea and that cheap, sweet cocoa butter she used to rub into her skin every night. It was my armor. It was the only thing that made me feel safe as I prepared to take her on her final flight back to the soil that raised her. As I walked toward the check-in counter for the premium cabin, I felt the gaze. You know, the one I'm talking about. It's not a stare, it's a scan. It's that split second where someone looks at you and decides exactly who you are, based on 1,000 little prejudices they've spent a lifetime collecting. The young woman behind the desk was bright-eyed and wore a silk scarf tied perfectly around her neck. She was smiling at the businessman in front of me, a tall guy in a crisp white shirt who looked like he'd never had a bad day in his life. When he stepped away, she looked at me, and the smile didn't just fade. It evaporated. It was like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the sun. "Sir, the line for economy starts back there, near the Starbucks," she said, her voice dripping with that polite, icy customer service tone that really means you don't belong here. I didn't get angry. I'm too old for that kind of fire. It just felt like a dull ache in my chest. A reminder that no matter how far I fly, I'm still grounded by some people's narrow minds. I reached into the pocket of my old sweater and pulled out my passport and the black and gold boarding pass. I didn't say a word. I just laid it on the counter. She looked at the pass. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at the pass. Her eyes went wide for a fraction of a second, but she didn't apologize. She just cleared her throat, tapped a few keys on her computer with a little too much force, and handed it back. "Gate B42. Sir, boarding in 20 minutes. I took my pass, gripped my wooden box a little tighter, and walked away. I could feel her eyes on my back, wondering how a man in a raggedy sweater and scuffed boots ended up with a seat in one eye. The walk to the gate felt longer than usual. Every luxury shop I passed, the Gucci store, the Rolex boutique, the places I actually owned shares in, felt like a taunt. I saw my reflection in a window, a middle-aged black man with salt and pepper hair, carrying a plain wooden box that looked like a piece of salvaged barn wood. I looked like a man carrying a burden, and in America, people don't like to see the burden. They want the polish. They want the performance. When I finally reached the gate, the boarding area was crowded. There was a separate lane for global elite passengers. I stood there, and again, I felt the wall of silence. The people in that line, mostly men who looked like they were born in a boardroom, didn't look at me. They looked through me. They adjusted their expensive watches and checked their iPhones, creating a physical gap between themselves and the man in the gray sweater. I looked down at the box in my hands. It was made of cherry wood, simple and unvarnished. My father had carved it years ago. It had a few scratches on the corners from the move to New York 30 years ago. It wasn't luxury. It was life. Inside were the ashes of a woman who had spent 40 years cleaning houses so her son could learn how to own them. To the people in this line, it was probably just a box of junk. To me, it was the most valuable thing in the entire airport. Now boarding all global elite and first-class passengers, the gate agent announced. I stepped forward. I felt the collective intake of breath from the people behind me. I heard a faint mutter, something about must be a mistake. But I kept my head up. I walked down that jet bridge. the air getting cooler and quieter as I left the chaos of the terminal behind. As I stepped onto the plane, I was greeted by the smell of hot towels and expensive champagne. And there she was, Sarah. She was standing at the galley, her blonde hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her uniform was flawless, not a single wrinkle. She was handing out menus with a practiced, plastic smile. When I stepped into the cabin, she didn't offer me a menu. She didn't offer me a greeting. She just stood there, her hands folded in front of her, blocking the aisle just enough to be an obstacle. "Can I help you?" "Sir, economy is through that curtain, all the way to the back," she said. Her voice was thin, like a wire about to snap. "I'm in 1A, I said quietly. I showed her my boarding pass. She didn't move. She took the pass from my hand, her fingers barely touching mine, as if she were afraid whatever I had might be contagious. She stared at the seat number for a long time. I watched her eyes dart from the ticket to my sweater, then down to my boots, and finally, they landed on the wooden box. Her lip curled, just a tiny bit, a flicker of disgust that she couldn't quite hide. 1A, she repeated, her voice flat. "Right, this way." She didn't lead me to the seat. She walked ahead of me like she was leading a prisoner to a cell. I followed her into the quiet sanctuary of the first-class cabin. It was beautiful, wide leather seats, personal screens, the kind of comfort most people only dream of. I sat down in the soft leather of 1A and felt the weight of the day settle into my bones. I didn't put the box in the overhead bin. I couldn't. I wasn't going to let her be alone up there in the dark. Sliding around with suitcases and overcoats, I placed the box gently on the large tray table in front of me. I let my fingers linger on the rough grain of the wood. I could almost feel the warmth of my mother's hand. I looked up, and Sarah was standing right there, looming over me. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was looking at the box on the table like it was a stain on a white silk dress. She put her hands on her hips, leaned in just a little too close, and cleared her throat with a sound that was meant to command attention. "Sir," she said, her voice loud enough for the other two passengers in the cabin to turn their heads. "You cannot keep that. Object there. It's a safety hazard. And quite frankly, it's not appropriate for this cabin." I looked from her cold, blue eyes down to the box, my heart beginning to hammer a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I reached out and placed my palm flat on top of the cherry wood, feeling the coldness of the cabin air clashing with the heat rising in my own skin. I didn't pull my hand away. Instead, I pressed down, anchoring myself to the only thing that felt real in that plastic, refrigerated world. The silence that followed her demand was heavier than the plane itself. I could feel the eyes of the man in 2B, a guy in a charcoal suit who had been nursing a scotch since before we pushed back from the gate, burning into the side of my head. He wasn't looking at me with sympathy. He was looking at me like I was a delay, a nuisance, a flickering light bulb in a 5-star hotel that needed to be replaced. Sarah didn't blink. She stood there, her chin tilted up, waiting for me to submit to the natural order of things. I didn't move my hand from the box. The wood felt grounded, a solid piece of the earth beneath my fingertips while we were suspended 30,000 feet in the air. I looked at the grain, the tiny swirls and knots in the cherry wood that my father had spent hours sanding down in our humid garage in Georgia. I remembered the sound of that sandpaper. Shh, shh, shh. A rhythm of love and labor. That box wasn't just a container, it was a sanctuary. And this woman, with her pressed uniform and her rehearsed authority, wanted to treat it like a piece of carry-on luggage that didn't meet the size requirements. "I understand your concerns about safety, "Ma'am," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. I kept it low, the way my mother used to talk when she was at her most serious. No yelling, just a quiet weight that demanded to be felt. "But this stays with me. It's secured. It's not going anywhere. Sir, I'm going to have to insist," she countered, her voice sharpening, losing that thin veil of professional courtesy. "The policy is clear. All personal items must be stowed for takeoff. That box could become a projectile in the event of turbulence. It's for your own protection and the protection of the other passengers." I looked over at the man in 2B. On his tray table sat a heavy glass of scotch and a thick, leather-bound briefcase that wasn't latched. Sarah hadn't said a word to him. She hadn't mentioned projectiles or protection to the man who looked like he belonged there. The hypocrisy was a bitter taste in the back of my throat. Like charcoal, it was the same taste I'd been swallowing for 50 years. I thought back to the reason I was wearing this pilled, oversized sweater. My mother, Mary, had spent 42 years cleaning houses in the good part of town. She used to come home with her cuticles raw from bleach and her back bent like a willow tree. But she never complained. She'd sit at the kitchen table, put on her reading glasses, and knit. She knitted my first scarf, my first pair of mittens, and finally, this sweater. She called it my victory coat. She told me that one day, I'd be sitting in places where people didn't think I belonged, and I'd need something to remind me of who I actually was. My mother cleaned houses so I could buy tickets like this, I whispered, more to myself than to Sarah. "I beg your pardon," Sarah snapped, leaning in closer. Her perfume was an aggressive floral scent, the kind that tries too hard to be elegant. "Nothing," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I'm just saying that I know the rules. I also know when the rules are being used as a weapon." The tension in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. The air conditioning hummed, a cold, mechanical whistle that seemed to mock the heat of the argument. I felt a surge of that old, familiar exhaustion. The black tax, we call it. The extra energy you have to spend just to exist in a space without being questioned, without being handled. I was a CEO. I had 500 people reporting to me. I had negotiated deals that shifted markets. But in this moment, in seat 1A, I was just a sir who was being difficult. Sarah's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She turned on her heel and marched back toward the galley. I knew she wasn't giving up. She was going for reinforcements. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a second. Trying to find my center, I thought about the box. Inside, my mother was finally at rest. She'd always wanted to see London. She used to look at pictures of the Thames and the old stone buildings in National Geographic magazines she'd find in the recycling bins of the houses she cleaned. She'd say, "Marcus, one day, we're gonna go there. We're gonna walk those streets, and we won't be there to sweep them." I had promised her, and I was a man who kept his promises. A few minutes later, I heard the heavy footfalls of someone else approaching. I opened my eyes to see Sarah returning, this time accompanied by a lead flight attendant, an older man with a silver mustache and a weary expression. He looked like he'd seen everything 1,000 times and just wanted to get through the shift. "Sir, my colleague tells me there's an issue with your luggage," the man said. He was trying to be the good cop, but the underlying edge was still there. "It's not luggage," I said, my hand still firmly on the box. "It's my mother." The man hesitated. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of something, maybe empathy, maybe just surprise, cross his face. But then he looked over at Sarah, who was vibrating with indignation, and then at the man in 2B, who was now openly staring. Waiting for the show. I understand, sir, and I'm sorry for your loss, the lead attendant said, his voice dropping an octave. But the regulations are very strict. We can place it in a special closet in the front, where it will be safe and handled with the utmost respect. But it cannot stay on the tray table. Why? I asked. Because it looks like wood and not Toomey nylon. Because it doesn't have a designer logo on it. The man next to me has a briefcase twice this size on his table. Why aren't you talking to him? The man in 2B scoffed. A sharp, ugly sound. Listen, pal, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Just put the damn box away so we can get moving. Some of us have actual places to be. The pal hit me like a slap. It was the sound of a man who felt he had the right to tell me how to grieve, how to sit, how to be. I felt the anger bubbling up, a hot, liquid thing in my gut, but I suppressed it. Anger is what they expect. Anger is the excuse they use to call security. I took a deep breath, the wool of my mother's sweater scratching against my neck, reminding me to be steady. I am in my seat, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a power I usually reserved for the boardroom. I have paid for this space. I am not interfering with the flight. I am holding a sacred item. If you want to move it, you'll have to move me. Sarah stepped forward. Her patience completely evaporated. Sir, if you continue to be non-compliant, we will be forced to return to the gate and have you escorted off this aircraft. Is that what you want? To be that passenger? I looked at her, and I didn't see a flight attendant. I saw every landlord who had ever lost my application. I saw every teacher who had told me to aim lower. I saw the shadow of the world that had tried to keep my mother in the shadows. Go ahead, I said. Call the gate. Tell them you're removing a man for holding his mother's ashes in a seat he paid for. See how that looks on the news tonight. She didn't expect that. She expected me to cower, or to yell, or to give in. The threat of the news made her flinch. She looked at the lead attendant, looking for a directive. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls of the first-class suite closing in on us. Fine, Sarah hissed, her voice a jagged whisper. But I am noting this in the flight log. Any liability is on you. She turned to leave, but as she did, her sleeve caught the edge of my tray table. It was a small movement, a clumsy accident born of her haste and her anger. The table jolted. The cherry wood box, which I had been holding so carefully, slid toward the edge. My heart skipped a beat, a sickening thud in my chest. Time seemed to slow down into a series of jagged, disconnected frames. I saw the box tip. I saw the lid that held everything I loved, start to shift. I lunged forward, my fingers clawing at the air, my breath catching in a dry, panicked sob as the box began its descent toward the cold, hard floor of the cabin. Sarah didn't reach out to help. She actually stepped back, a look of pure, unadulterated horror. I threw my body weight toward the floor, desperate to catch it before it shattered. The carpeted floor of the first-class cabin was plush, but it felt like concrete when my knees slammed into it. I didn't feel the bruise forming. All I felt was the rough texture of the cherry wood as my fingers clamped around the edges of the box. Inches from the deck, I was hunched over, gasping, my chest pressed against my thighs, shielding that box with my entire body, like I was back on the football field, protecting a fumble. But this wasn't a game. This was the only thing I had left of the woman who had prayed me into every success I'd ever had. I stayed there for a second, my forehead resting against the cool wood, my heart thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. The cabin was deathly quiet. No one moved. No one offered a hand. I could hear the faint hiss of the oxygen system and the distant, muffled roar of the engines prepping for the climb. But inside that tiny, expensive room, the air had turned to ice. See? Sarah's voice cut through the silence like a jagged blade. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She didn't care if I'd just split my kneecaps open. This is exactly what I was warning you about. Sir, your item is a hazard. You nearly tripped me, and you almost caused a scene. Now, for the last time, give me the box, or I will have the captain cycle us back to the terminal. I looked up at her. From the floor, my glasses had slid down the bridge of my nose. I must have looked pathetic, a middle-aged man in a pilled sweater, kneeling in the dirt of a first-class cabin, clutching a wooden crate. I saw the triumph in her eyes. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd finally proven that I was exactly what she suspected, someone who didn't know how to behave in polite society. I stood up slowly. My joints popped. A reminder of the years I'd spent working 18-hour days to build an empire. I didn't brush the dust off my trousers. I just stood there, holding the box to my heart, my breath coming out in ragged, hot bursts. You want to know what's in here? I asked. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was low, vibrating with a frequency that made the man in 2B look away from his scotch. You've spent the last 20 minutes treating me like a criminal because I won't let go of a piece of wood. You want to see what you almost smashed on the floor? Sarah rolled her eyes. Her hand held out impatiently. Sir, I don't care if it's gold bars or your lunch. It's a safety violation. It's my mother, I said. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It's not an object. It's the ashes of a woman who spent 40 years scrubbing floors just like this one, so that her son wouldn't have to. She never got to fly first class when she was alive. She never even got to leave the state. I'm taking her to London because she dreamed of it every single day while she was washing other people's laundry. And you looked at her like she was trash. For the first time, Sarah's mask slipped. A flicker of something. Not quite guilt, but perhaps the realization that she had miscalculated passed over her face, but it was gone in a heartbeat, replaced by that same rigid, bureaucratic coldness. I'm sorry for your loss. Truly, she said, her voice devoid of any actual sorrow. But the rules apply to everyone. Regardless of what's inside the container, I need you to hand it over. No, I said. I'm not giving her to you. I don't trust you to touch her. That's it, she hissed, turning toward the cockpit. I'm calling it in. She didn't have to. The heavy door to the flight deck creaked open. Out stepped a man in a crisp white uniform, 4 gold stripes gleaming on his shoulders. He was tall, with graying temples and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. Captain Miller. He looked at Sarah, then at the man in 2B, and finally, his eyes landed on me. Sarah started talking before he could even take a step. Captain, I'm glad you're here. This passenger is being completely non-compliant. He's created a safety risk with an unsecured item and is refusing to follow crew instructions. I've tried to be patient, but... The captain didn't look at her. He was squinting at me, his head tilted to the side. Marcus Thorne. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It felt like the floor had shifted under Sarah's feet. I nodded once, my jaw tight. Hello, Captain. Captain Miller stepped forward, ignoring Sarah entirely. He stuck out his hand, a genuine, warm smile breaking through his stern expression. I thought that was you. I recognize the voice from the board meeting video last month. "It's an honor to have you on board, sir." He turned to Sarah, and his smile vanished. "Is there a problem here, Sarah?" she stammered, her face turning a shade of white that matched the captain's shirt. I was just... The passenger has a wooden box. Captain, it's not stowed. I was just trying to maintain the safety protocols." Captain Miller looked at the box in my hands. Then he looked at the man in 2B, whose briefcase was still sitting wide open on his tray table. He looked at the half-empty glass of scotch. Then he looked back at me. "Mr. Thorne is the primary benefactor for our new environmental initiative," the captain said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a gavel. "His company literally designed the software that's going to keep us in the air today. If Mr. Thorne says the box is secure, then as far as I'm concerned, that box is a part of his person." He turned back to me, his expression softening. "I heard what you said, Marcus, about your mother. My deepest condolences. My own mother was a nurse, spent her life on her feet. I know what it means to carry that weight." He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. The first time anyone on this plane had touched me with anything resembling humanity. "Sarah," the captain said, not looking at her, "go back to the galley. I'll handle the service for Mr. Thorne myself for the remainder of the flight. And when we land in London, I want you to stay on the aircraft. We're going to have a very long conversation with the chief purser about discretion and implicit bias." Sarah didn't say a word. She didn't even look at me. She turned and vanished behind the curtain, her footsteps quick and shamed. I felt the tension leave my body in a sudden, violent wave. I sank back into seat 1A, the leather creaking under my weight. I was exhausted. I was successful. I was powerful. I was a CEO. But in that moment, I just felt like a boy who had almost lost his mom again. The man in 2B suddenly found his scotch very interesting, staring deep into the amber liquid as if it held the secrets of the universe. He didn't look at me. He didn't say pal anymore. The silence was back, but the air felt cleaner. Captain Miller leaned in. "Is there anything you need, Marcus? A drink? A blanket? We've got a long flight ahead." I looked down at the cherry wood box. I ran my thumb over the grain, feeling the soul of the wood, the soul of my father's work, and the soul of the woman resting inside. I looked out the small window at the tarmac, where the lights were beginning to twinkle as the sun dipped below the horizon. "I just need a moment," I said, my voice thick. "Just a moment with her. Take all the time you need," the captain whispered. He squeezed my shoulder one last time and headed back toward the cockpit. I sat there, alone in the luxury I had earned, but never truly felt I owned. I looked at the pilled wool of my sweater, the victory coat that had seen me through the worst of the day. I realized then that no matter how much money I made, or how many captains knew my name, the world would always try to find a way to make me feel small. But as I pulled the box closer, resting it on my lap, I felt a strange sense of peace. The worst had happened. The mask had been ripped off, and I was still standing. I reached into the seat pocket and pulled out the small, laminated card with the safety instructions, but I didn't read it. Instead, I turned it over and found a blank space on the back. I took out my pen, the gold one my board gave me when we went public, and I started to write. I wrote to the version of myself that had been afraid to enter this cabin. I felt the plane begin to taxi. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes as the engines began their final, powerful roar, the force of the acceleration pinning me into the seat as we prepared to leave the earth behind. The roar of the engines eventually settled into a steady, Rhythmic hum, the kind of sound that feels like a heartbeat when everything else in the world has gone silent. We were leveling out, slicing through the midnight sky at 36,000 feet. Outside that thick glass window, the lights of the coast were fading into a vast, black velvet nothingness. For the first time in 3 days, I felt like I could actually draw a full breath. I looked down at my lap, where the cherrywood box sat, and I realized that for all the turbulence we'd just been through on the ground, the air up here was perfectly, hauntingly still. About an hour into the flight, the curtain to the galley pushed open. It wasn't the captain this time. It was Sarah. She didn't march. She didn't loom. She walked toward my seat with her head down, her movements stiff, like she was walking on a tightrope. She held a small silver tray with a glass of sparkling water and a single linen napkin. She set it down on the edge of the console, never once making eye contact. Her hands were shaking, just a little, but enough for me to see the tremor. I brought you this. Mr. Thorne, she whispered. The sir was gone, replaced by a name she now knew held power, but the weight of it seemed to choke her. I looked at the water, then back at her. I could have been the man she expected me to be. I could have snapped my fingers, demanded her badge number, and watched her career vanish into the Atlantic. I had the leverage. I had the win. But as I looked at her, all I saw was a person who was prisoner to her own fear. She was so busy guarding the gates of a world she thought she owned that she'd forgotten how to be a human being in it. Sarah, I said. She flinched, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were red-rimmed, stripped of that plastic professional shine. Why did you think I didn't belong here? I asked. I wasn't angry. I was genuinely curious. I wanted to hear her say it. She swallowed hard, her throat working against the silk scarf that now looked like it was suffocating her. I made an assumption based on the appearance of the situation. I was wrong. I am deeply sorry for the disrespect I showed you and your mother. It was a scripted apology, likely coached by the captain in the galley. But there was a flicker of genuine terror in her voice. The terror of a person realizing the world is much bigger and much more complicated than the boxes they try to put people in. My appearance is a choice, I told her, running my hand over the pilled wool of my mother's sweater. This sweater has more value than this entire aircraft. It was made with love, not for profit. The box. It's not a hazard. It's a legacy. Next time you see a man who doesn't fit your picture of success, remember this moment. Because the next person might not be a CEO. They might just be a human being who doesn't have the strength to fight back like I did. Don't be the reason someone loses their faith in the world. She nodded, a single tear escaping and tracking through her foundation. She didn't say another word. She just turned and retreated. I didn't feel a sense of revenge. I just felt a profound sadness that we still have to have these conversations at 6 miles high. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of stars and soft light. I didn't sleep. I spent the time talking to my mother in the quiet of my mind. I told her about the company, about how her grandkids were doing, and about how we were finally going to walk those London streets. When the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and gold, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. When the wheels finally touched down at Heathrow, the thump felt like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I waited until everyone else had cleared the cabin. I didn't want to rush. I stood up, tucked the cherrywood box under my arm, and walked toward the exit. Captain Miller was waiting at the door. He didn't say much. He just gave me a sharp, respectful nod and a firm handshake. He knew. Stepping out onto the jet bridge, The air was different. It was cool, damp, and smelled of rain and jet fuel, the smell of a new beginning. I walked through the terminal, and this time, I didn't look at the people looking at me. I didn't care about the gaze. I wasn't scanning the room for judgment. I was just Marcus, and I had a promise to keep. I took a cab to the South Bank. I walked along the Thames, the gray water churning under the bridges. I found a quiet spot, away from the tourists, where the old stone walls met the river. I opened the box. "We're here, Mama," I whispered. The wind caught the fine, gray dust, carrying it out over the water, swirling it into the mist of a city she had only ever seen in the pages of a discarded magazine. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I'd been carrying since I was a little boy, watching her scrub floors. The debt was paid. The victory was hers. So, why am I telling you this story today? I'm telling you because I know some of you are wearing your own victory coats. I know some of you are walking into rooms where the air feels too thin for you to breathe. I know you've felt that scan, that silent judgment that tells you to get back in line, to go to the back of the plane, to stay in the shadows. But I want you to look at me. Look at this old sweater. It doesn't matter what they think they see. What matters is what you know is inside the box of your soul. Your history, your struggle, and your integrity are your first-class ticket. Don't ever let someone else's narrow mind make you feel like an intruder in your own life. You belong in every room you walk into. Period. Success isn't about the seat. 1A. It's about being able to sit in that seat and still remember the smell of the cocoa butter and the sound of the sandpaper in the garage. It's about holding on to your truth when the world tries to give you a lie. I want to hear from you now. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you had to defend your right to exist in a space? Have you ever had a victory coat that kept you warm when the world was cold? Drop a comment below. I read every single one of them. I want to know your truths. And if this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button. Join us here at Unseen Sky Truths. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they belong. I'm Marcus. And remember, your value isn't something someone else can give you, which means it's not something they can take away. I'll see you in the next story. Peace and love to you all. Be well.